You're listening to LVB Podcast Show with your friend, advocate, and host, Alvaro.
Hello and welcome to LVB Show. My name is Alvaro and I'm very happy to be with you tonight. I want to say thank you so much for people listening from the United States, from Latin America, from Europe, Asia, and everybody else who is listening to the show right now. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about audio games, and we have Marty Schultz from the United States. He founded Blindfold Games. So Marty, can you please tell us a little bit about your background, your life?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to your show. So I'm semi-retired. I've been working with building software programs for most of my life. I live in Miami and have a daughter who's about 18 years old, and I've been married to my wife for about 21 years.
Okay, that's a very nice story. Now, what can you tell us about when did you started Blindfold Games?
Oh, that's a great story unto itself. About 5 years ago, I was watching my daughter, who was not visually impaired, and she was working on her birthday wish list. She was about 13 years old at the time. And every day she would have a new birthday wish list on paper, and she'd write it down and then rip it up, and the next day she would write another one and rip it up. And this went on and on, starting about a month before her birthday. I then thought, why don't I create an app for kids to create their birthday wish list? So I figured I could either create the app and program it myself and then test it with some of her friends to see if I hit mark, or I could make this into a learning opportunity for students at her school. So I contacted the head of school, and I said, I want to run an after-school club for about 6 weeks. I'll meet with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders 3 times a week after school for about an hour, and over the course of 6 weeks, we'll end up building this app. And that's what we did, and the app that the students and I created was called Wish to List. And what it would do is it would let kids in grade school and middle school put in their birthday wish list, and then they could share it with their friends, and their friends could comment on it, and they could message back and forth. And the idea was when they were completely done, they could send the list off to their parents, and hopefully the parents would buy those gifts for the child's birthday or holiday. Well, while the app itself wasn't a hit, the kids enjoyed the class and learning how to build an app phenomenally. And the head of school comes back to me and says, Marty, can you run the app club again? And by the way, after you drop your daughter off in the morning at school, would you mind teaching first period computer programming? So being a good volunteer parent, I agreed to the programming class. But the more interesting thing was we met with the app club again, a different set of students, and they decided instead of building some boring app, they wanted to build a game. And I said, I'm okay with building a game, but it has to be a game that's really different from anything that's already done. So I sent the students off, and we met about 2 weeks later, but every idea they came up with was like a game that was already in the App Store. So I said, well, let's do something that doesn't need the screen. And we started brainstorming about that idea, and we came up with the idea, let's do a driving game for blind people. Now, none of the students had met anyone who was visually impaired before, but we figured you would drive with your ears instead of your eyes, and you would use the iPhone as a steering wheel. And if you drove too far to the left, if you turned the steering wheel too far to the left, the music would get louder in your left ear. And if you went too far to the right, the music would be louder in your right ear. And you would aim for noisy prizes like popping popcorn and avoid obstacles like barking dogs. Well, the kids and I spent the next 6 months designing each level of the app, and we draw it out on a whiteboard, and then we'd come up with little games to play within each level. And after in the evenings, I would do the programming at home. And after about 6 months, we had a decent 35-level game. And we decided to test it at the Miami Lighthouse for the Blind, that's not far from the school. And we brought it there, And the teens there absolutely loved it. We had staged about 15 iPads and with earbuds or headphones and all, and they were playing for a couple of hours. And one of the teens at that, and the testing, one of the teens said, "Is the screen dark when you play?" And I said, "Yes, because I want the same experience for sighted people as blind people." So that boy said, "Well, you better put something on the screen. People think their iPhone are broken." So we made that change, and that was the same boy who also gave the name to the game called Blindfold Racer. And from there, we were testing it with more people. We were adding more levels to it. And I think I tested at the Broward Lighthouse for the Blind, which is basically the next town north of Miami. And one of the girls there who had been blind since birth said, "I just can't wait to play against my sighted friends. I'm so beat them." And she liked it, so we ended up putting it into the App Store, and it quickly jumped to the top of the accessible games list for a couple of years and received mentions in some of these online forums like AppleViz, where we were honored with Developer of the Year and Best Game. So that's kind of a quick summary of everything.
Your story is very good. We had a little bit of... Yes, we had a problem listening to when you said that you had to make a change in the screen. The sound was not as great. Can you repeat for our listeners, please, that change that you had to make?
Hello? Did I lose you?
Hello, you're listening right now.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't mind making sure you still heard me.
Yeah, so I was saying that the change that you had to make on the screen, we were not able to hear your comment about what change did you have to make.
Well, what I ended up doing was putting things on the screen, just like little instructions. I think there's like one line of text that says, you will play better if you close your eyes.
Okay, very good. That was smart.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how...
And the other thing we did, the other thing we did in the game is I actually tried coming up with a tutorial for the game. And initially, the tutorial was about 90 seconds long. And whenever I gave the tutorial to somebody who was visually impaired, they listened to all 90 seconds of the tutorial and they fully understood how to play the game. But every time I gave this to a sighted person, be it an adult or a child or a teenager, they had to go through the tutorial 3 or 4 times before they understood it. And then I changed the tutorial to only give the tutorial in like 6 different lessons, each are about 10 seconds long. And as you move from lesson to lesson, you tap the screen. And then once I did that, sighted people were much better at the tutorials. That led me realize that a lot of times people who are visually impaired are much better at listening and remembering than sighted people are.
That's a very good point, Marty. That's a very good point. For our listeners, we have a very powerful memory that we exercise every day, indeed. So how many games do you have right now?
At this point, we probably have over 80 games.
Oh, wow.
And you name a game, whether people like it in their childhood or whether they like it as an adult or something they enjoy playing, chances are we've created it. And we have about 6 different categories of games. We have sports games, things like European football and baseball and bowling. We have card games like Rummy and Uno and Hearts and 1,000 Miles. We have puzzle games like similar to Candy Crush or Sudoku or crossword puzzles. We have action games, similar to video games like Flappy Bird or Space Invaders. We have casino games like blackjack and roulette. You name it, we've probably done it. We have board games like Monopoly and Clue and Checkers. So we've got a lot of games.
And Marty, do you have like a top 5 most popular games?
Yeah, I would say if I look at the number of downloads of the games, I would say Blindfold Racer is number one. That was the very first game we built, followed probably by Blindfold Bowling, Blindfold Color Crush, which is very similar to Candy Crush, is probably number three. What else? Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy tend to be very popular. Solitaire is very popular. Crazy 8 and Uno are very popular.
Two questions come to mind. The first is, so how much it costs for our listeners to play these games? How it works?
All the games you download for free, that gives you about an hour or two of play. And then if you like the game, you can upgrade the game for anywhere between $3 and about $7 or $8, depending on what features you want out of the game.
Very good. Tell us, is it for our listeners who may be thinking of developing a game for people who are visually impaired and blind, how difficult is it to build a game like this?
These are, it's difficult, okay? It's all these games, you have to build them in the native programming language that runs on the iPhone and the iPad, which is called, there are two variants of this. One is called Objective-C, the other is called Swift. You really have to know how to be a programmer to do that.
Right.
The other thing is these games have a lot of not visual components to them, but there's a lot of things going on, so you really have to understand how to use the tools for building software. So building an app is fairly difficult if you're visually impaired. Now, Apple has done some things to make it easier, and they came out with something called the Swift Playground for building apps, which is fully accessible. The other thing is, one of the apps that we work with, one of the game servers we work with, is something called RS Games. RS Games is a system whereby it has about 20 games built into it, and you can connect in with either a Mac or a Windows PC. Well, about 2.5 years ago, I contacted the people at RS Games. It's a set of 3 or 4 visually impaired programmers, and they did this entirely on their own. And I said, I will do an iPhone app that will talk to your game server, so the same way people can play Monopoly or what's another one? Cards Against Humanity or Uno or slot machines on their game server from their Mac or their PC. They can now also do it with an iPhone. And the nice thing about those games is, whereas most of my games are designed where you play by yourself or you play against computer opponents, with their game server, you actually are playing against real people. So when you're playing Monopoly on their game server, you're actually playing with somebody else somewhere in the world. And those guys created their entire game server in a language called Python. And like I said, they are visually impaired, so it's much easier to build something like that than it is to build an app. But again, Apple is making major strides in making their programming tools much more accessible.
That's very good to know that you are able to play also against other people, and that's also very interesting for our listeners. And we have to say, Marty, we have a lot of women listening, and they play audio games also. Do you have like a record of how many women have downloaded your games?
Apple doesn't tell us the number of people based on their gender.
Okay.
I do know some of the games have been downloaded more than 20,000 times.
Oh, wow.
I think we just hit, if you take the number of downloads across all games, it's in excess of 500,000.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's incredible. And tell us, the games are played using voiceover?
Well, in the main screens, like the menu screen or the settings screen or the help screen, yes, it uses voiceover. In the once you're in the game screen, though, we either have a voice of a voice actor in like Blindfold Racer, it was my daughter. Otherwise, we actually generate the voice using some features of the iPhone. And in those cases, you can pick whether you want a man's voice or a woman's voice, and which accent you want, and how fast you want it to talk. But it's much more flexible than using simple voiceover. All the Blindfold games are designed from the ground up to be played as audio games and designed to be very fast. When most of your listeners are using voiceover, they have to search around on the screen to find which button to push and then double tap the button.
Right.
That can be a very frustrating experience when you're playing a game, because that means the person who's visually impaired is playing much slower than the person who can see.
Right. We
designed these games from the ground up to be fast as an audio game. So each command might be a swipe up or 2 fingers swipe down or 3 taps. And a lot of the gestures between one game are similar to another game. So once you've learned one of the games, you pretty much know how all the games work.
Oh, very interesting. And for our listeners, I have interviewed people from Applebee's, and they are wonderful. So if they have said that your games are very good, they know why they are saying that. So I have to say that for our listeners. Applebee's.com is a wonderful source for information Apple related for the visually impaired and blind worldwide. Marty, you were telling me before the interview began about your plans about making this organization be even more powerful and combined with Android. And can you tell us about those plans?
Sure. We were informed about a year ago. We started hearing from teachers for visually impaired and orientation mobility specialists saying they were using some of our games to teach certain skills like directionality, like clock directions or compass directions, whether the cow is at 2 o'clock or the fence is to the northeast. And they were finding that these games would help students practice certain skills. And I had been meeting with some people at different organizations, and they said, Marty, you should take a real look to see whether you can use these games in a lot of learning environments. So we did a lot of market research and put out a survey for these teachers to fill out. And we had literally hundreds of responses from teachers telling us how if we built games that were designed around teaching skills, they could use it as part of their curriculum. So we launched this company, and we raised some money for it a few months ago, and we'll be coming out with our first few games over the next 6 months. And those games will work on both iPhone and Android. They'll be designed around what's called in the United States the expanded core curriculum, which is to teach different skills for independent living skills, as well as all the things you need, wayfinding and Braille and everything else. And it'll be designed anywhere from a pre-K student, pre-kindergarten, all the way up to 12th grade. And we'll have it in multiple languages as well.
Wow, that is great. Did you expect this impact from your applications in the whole United States?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Did you expect this success, this impact in the United States as a whole in schools, etc.?
No, we were surprised. I figured I would do this survey and I would hear from maybe 100 teachers and that, but it was just an overwhelmingly positive response, and I've since talked to a lot of principals and superintendents of schools who have a large number of visually impaired students, and they all think this will be a great boon for them.
And finally, Marty, how can people contact you? Maybe even give you suggestions of games, which I have one from the top of my mind, if you can consider making a swimming game.
So here's how to get through to me. You can have lots of information about the games at blindfoldgames.org. It's a fully accessible site. If people want to send an email to me, it's marty@blindfoldgames.org. They can follow me on Twitter, and it's @blindfoldgames. Just send me an email if you have an idea for a game. We're just we're going to be releasing another game which is relating to bobsledding or sledding down a ski slope in a few weeks, and I'll be able to take that game and turn it into other types of games such as car racing or swimming.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Marty, it has been wonderful to have you on. We really appreciate what you are doing, because it's not only raising awareness about everybody is able to play games and enjoy themselves with this wonderful entertainment tool, but also this is going to help educate and improve skills for many people in this planet. So that is very important, Marty, what you're doing.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. And for our listeners, remember, you can email me if you want to be on the show at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com. So this is Alvaro from LVB Show saying good night.